The thunder of hooves across the rugged terrain broke the early dawn stillness as Flint Calloway rode like the devil himself was on his heels. Blood trickled down his arm, but he paid it no mind. In Flint's world, pain was just another companion on the long, dusty trail of life. It was 1878, and the untamed lands of Colorado showed no mercy to those who couldn't keep pace with its brutal demands. "Come on, Diablo," Flint urged his midnight stallion, leaning forward in the saddle. The wound in his shoulder burned like hellfire, courtesy of a bounty hunter who'd recognized him in the last town. Behind them, the rising sun painted the mountains with hues of amber and gold, illuminating the terrain he knew better than most men knew their own faces. Flint had been running for 3 years now, not from the law exactly, but from men who wanted the price on his head. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd once been a lawman himself, before life taught him that justice wore different faces depending on who was paying for it. The town of Moab came into view as Flint guided Diablo around a bend in the trail. Nestled between towering red cliffs and the winding Colorado River, Moab was growing from a modest settlement into something resembling civilization, though in Flint's experience, civilization was just another word for complicated. He slowed Diablo to a trot as they approached the town limits. His reputation had a way of preceding him, but Moab was far enough from his last trouble that he might find a few days' peace to tend his wound and replenish his supplies. "Easy now," he murmured to his horse as they passed the first structures on the outskirts, a tannery and blacksmith shop, both already alive with morning activity. The town was waking up, and Flint pulled his hat lower over his eyes. Standing out was never in his best interests. The pain in his shoulder throbbed with each step Diablo took down the main street. Flint knew he needed attention for the wound soon, before infection set in. He'd survived worse, but he wasn't fool enough to tempt fate. He dismounted outside the town's only doctor's office, a modest wooden structure with a hand-painted sign that read, "Dr. Franklin Wilcox, physician and surgeon." Tying Diablo to the hitching post, Flint took a moment to gather his strength before climbing the 3 wooden steps to the door. The bell above the door jingled as he pushed it open. The waiting room was empty, save for a young woman who sat behind a small desk, head bent over a ledger. When she looked up, Flint felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a moment of genuine surprise. Her eyes were the color of sage after rain, set in a face that seemed too delicate for the harsh surroundings of Moab. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing high cheekbones and a determined jaw that hinted at character beneath the beauty. "Can I help you, sir?" Her voice carried no trace of the Western twang common to the region. Eastern, Flint guessed, maybe Boston. "I need to see the doctor," Flint replied, removing his hat with his good arm. "Bullet wound." The woman stood immediately, concern replacing her professional demeanor. "Doctor Wilcox is away on a house call, but I'm Sophia Fairchild. I assist him." Her eyes fell to the blood-stained sleeve of his shirt. "You'll need attention right away." Flint hesitated. Having a woman tend to his wounds wasn't ideal, but the alternative was riding another 20 miles to the next town with a doctor. "I assure you, I'm quite capable," she said, reading his hesitation. "I studied nursing in Philadelphia before coming west." "Philadelphia's a long way from Moab," Flint remarked, following her into an examination room. "So is wherever you came from, I'd wager." Her reply carried no judgment, only observation. As she helped him remove his coat and shirt, Flint noticed her hands steady and confident, with none of the timidity he might have expected from an Eastern lady confronted with a wounded stranger. "The bullet went through," Sophia observed, examining the wound. "That's fortunate. It means I won't have to dig it out." She moved to a cabinet and began gathering supplies. "You'll need stitches, Mr. Calloway, Flint Calloway." Her hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "The name is familiar." "It's a common enough name," Flint replied, though they both knew it wasn't. Sophia cleaned the wound methodically, her touch professional but gentle. "This will hurt," she warned before applying alcohol to disinfect the injury. Flint didn't flinch, though the burning sensation was intense. He'd learned long ago that showing pain was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Most men would have at least grunted," Sophia commented as she threaded a needle. "Most men talk too much," Flint replied. A hint of a smile touched her lips. "And you're a man of few words, I see." "Words get a man in trouble faster than bullets sometimes." "And which got you this?" she asked, beginning to stitch the wound closed. Flint remained silent, watching her work. After a moment, Sophia seemed to accept that she'd receive no answer. "You have a gentle touch for a doctor's assistant," Flint said finally, surprising himself by breaking the silence. "And you have remarkable composure for a man being sewn up without laudanum," she countered, tying off the last stitch. "Though I can offer you some now if you'd like." "I need a clear head." Sophia nodded as if his answer confirmed something for her. "You're running from someone. Aren't we all?" Flint's voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical pain. She bandaged the wound with efficient movements. "Stay in town at least 3 days. The wound needs to be checked for infection, and those stitches shouldn't be stressed by hard riding." Flint stood, reaching for his shirt. "I appreciate your concern, Miss Fairchild, but I rarely stay anywhere longer than a night." "Then you'll tear those stitches and likely die of infection in some God-forsaken canyon," she said matter-of-factly. "Your choice, Mr. Calloway." Their eyes met, and Flint saw something in hers that he recognized: determination forged in fire. This wasn't a woman who backed down easily. 2 days, he conceded. 3, she countered. "And you'll come back tomorrow to have the wound checked." Flint put his hat back on, a slight smile touching his normally impassive features. "You drive a hard bargain for a lady from Philadelphia." "Philadelphia teaches its own kind of toughness, Mr. Calloway." She wrote something in the ledger on her desk. "That will be $2 for today's treatment." Flint paid without comment, though the amount was far less than most doctors would charge. "Much obliged, Miss Fairchild." "Tomorrow morning, Mr. Calloway. Don't make me come looking for you." Something told Flint she meant it. As he stepped back into the harsh sunlight of Moab's Main Street, he realized that for the first time in months, something other than survival occupied his thoughts. Flint secured a room at the Colorado House, a modest establishment that offered clean beds and minimal questions. After stabling Diablo and taking his meager possessions to his room, he made his way to the local bathhouse. A hot bath and a shave would help clear his head, which seemed uncharacteristically foggy after his encounter with Sophia Fairchild. The bathhouse was quiet in the middle of the day. Flint paid for a private room, then soaked his aching body in the steaming water, careful to keep his bandaged shoulder dry. The heat eased some of the tension from his muscles, but did little to quiet his mind. There was something about Sophia that nagged at him, not just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the calm confidence in her eyes, the way she'd stood her ground against him. Women usually reacted to Flint in one of 2 ways: fear or fascination with his dangerous reputation. Sophia had shown neither. She'd treated him like any other patient, with professional care and a touch of exasperation. After his bath, Flint headed to the town's mercantile to replenish his supplies. The bell jangled as he entered the store, and an older man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Afternoon, stranger," the shopkeeper greeted him. "What can I help you with today?" Flint listed his needs: ammunition, jerky, coffee, and a new shirt to replace the one ruined by his wound. As the shopkeeper gathered the items, the door opened again, and Sophia entered the store. She nodded to Flint with professional courtesy. "Mr. Calloway, I see you're still in town." "As instructed," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. The shopkeeper looked between them with interest. "You two acquainted?" "Miss Fairchild patched me up this morning," Flint explained before she could answer. "Best thing that happened to Moab was Miss Fairchild coming to work with Doc Wilcox," the shopkeeper said enthusiastically. "She's got a healing touch, this one." Sophia smiled modestly. "You're too kind, Mr. Jenkins." She turned to Flint. "How's the shoulder feeling?" "It's served me fine so far," Flint responded, deliberately vague. "That's not an answer," Sophia observed, but didn't press further. She turned to the shopkeeper. "I need some more of that willow bark tea, Mr. Jenkins, and perhaps some of those candied ginger pieces for Mrs. Patterson's morning sickness." While Jenkins filled Sophia's order, Flint found himself studying her profile. In the daylight streaming through the shop windows, he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes and a few freckles scattered across her nose, details he'd missed in the dimmer light of the doctor's office. "Will you be staying through Sunday, Mr. Calloway?" Sophia asked suddenly, catching him watching her. The question caught him off guard. "I haven't planned that far ahead. The town's having a social after church services. It might be a pleasant diversion for you." Her tone was casual, but Flint sensed something more behind the invitation. "I'm not one for socials, Miss Fairchild." She nodded as if his answer was expected. "Of course, though sometimes new experiences can surprise us." She gathered her purchases. "Remember, tomorrow morning for that wound check." After she left, the shopkeeper chuckled. "That's quite a lady, our Miss Fairchild. Came out here from back east about 6 months ago. Brother was supposed to meet her in Denver, but he died of cholera before she arrived. Instead of heading back east like most would, she came on to Moab. Doc Wilcox was advertising for help, and she stepped right in." Flint hadn't asked for the information, but found himself listening intently anyway. "Shame about her brother," Flint commented, paying for his goods. "Indeed. He was planning to start a newspaper here." Miss Fairchild brought all his printing equipment with her. It's sitting unused in a shed behind the doctor's office. She says she's still planning to honor his dream someday, but doctoring keeps her plenty busy for now. Flint nodded, gathering his purchases. The conversation had revealed more about Sophia Fairchild than he'd intended to learn. Knowledge about people could be dangerous. It created connections, and connections were vulnerabilities in Flint's world. He spent the remainder of the afternoon maintaining his weapons and observing the town from the window of his room. Moab was growing, but still small enough that a stranger was noticed. Several times he caught people glancing up at his window, curiosity evident in their expressions. Being the object of attention made Flint uneasy. As evening approached, hunger drove him to the town's only proper restaurant, attached to the Colorado House. He chose a table in the corner with his back to the wall, an old habit that had served him well over the years. The restaurant was half full, mostly with local business owners and a few travelers. Flint ordered steak and potatoes, along with a cup of coffee. He was halfway through his meal when the door opened, and Sophia entered with an elderly gentleman Flint assumed must be Dr. Wilcox. The doctor spotted Flint and headed toward his table, Sophia following. "So you're the gunshot patient Sophie patched up," he said without preamble, extending his hand. "Dr. Franklin Wilcox." Flint shook the offered hand. "Flint Calloway. Mind if we join you?" Been a long day of house calls, and these old bones need to sit. Before Flint could object, Wilcox was pulling out a chair for Sophia and then seating himself. The doctor signaled to the waitress for coffee. "Sophie tells me you took a bullet clean through the shoulder. Lucky man. An inch to the right and we'd be measuring you for a pine box instead of stitches." "I've had practice being lucky," Flint replied dryly. Dr. Wilcox chuckled. "I bet you have." He studied Flint with shrewd eyes that belied his grandfatherly appearance. "Calloway. That name rings a bell." "As I told Mr. Calloway, it's a common enough name," Sophia interjected smoothly. Wilcox snorted. "Not that common." He sipped the coffee the waitress had brought. "Weren't you a lawman up in Wyoming territory some years back?" Flint's hand tensed around his fork. "For a time. Thought so. Read about that business in Cheyenne. Nasty affair." "Dr. Wilcox, perhaps Mr. Calloway would prefer not to discuss his past over dinner," Sophia suggested quietly. The doctor waved a hand dismissively. "Just making conversation, Sophie." But he changed the subject, launching into a story about a difficult birth he'd attended that day. Throughout the meal, Flint noticed Sophia watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Her gaze was assessing, not fearful or admiring as he was accustomed to from women who knew his reputation. When dinner concluded, Dr. Wilcox insisted on paying for all 3 meals despite Flint's objections. "Consider it professional courtesy," the doctor said. "Besides, Sophie says you're a model patient. Didn't even flinch during stitching." Outside the restaurant, the doctor bid them good night and headed toward his home on the other side of town, leaving Flint and Sophia standing alone in the cool evening air. "I should escort you home," Flint offered, surprising himself. "Thank you, but it's not necessary. Moab is quite safe, and I only live behind the doctor's office." "Nevertheless," Flint insisted, falling into step beside her. They walked in silence for a moment before Sophia spoke. "I apologize for Dr. Wilcox's questions. He means well, but subtlety isn't his strong suit." "No harm done," Flint replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Was he right? About Wyoming? Flint's jaw tightened. "Yes." Sophia nodded, accepting his terse answer. "People come west for new beginnings. Whatever happened in Wyoming is best left in Wyoming," Flint interrupted. They reached the doctor's office, and Sophia stopped at the small house attached to the rear of the building. A soft light glowed in one window. "This is me," she said, turning to face him. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Calloway." "Flint," he corrected her. "If you're going to be digging around in my shoulder, you might as well use my given name." A smile touched her lips. "Flint, then, and I'm Sophia." The moonlight caught in her hair, turning the dark strands to midnight silk. For a brief moment, Flint allowed himself to wonder what it might feel like to touch those strands, to see if they were as soft as they appeared. "Good night, Sophia," he said instead, stepping back. "I'll see you in the morning." "Don't forget," she called after him as he walked away. "I won't," he promised, and meant it. Back in his room at the Colorado house, Flint cleaned his revolver by lamplight, a ritual that usually calmed his mind. Tonight, however, his thoughts kept drifting to sage-green eyes and a determined chin. He knew he should leave Moab at first light, wound or no wound. Staying in one place was dangerous, and forming connections even more so. But for the first time in years, the thought of riding away left a hollow feeling in his chest. 3 days, he reminded himself. 3 days, and then back to the trail. Dawn broke clear and cool over Moab, painting the red rock formations surrounding the town with golden light. Flint had been awake for hours, restless despite his exhaustion. His shoulder throbbed dully, a constant reminder of the bullet that had nearly ended his life. After a simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits in the hotel dining room, he made his way to the doctor's office as promised. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as he entered, finding Sophia arranging supplies on a shelf. She turned at his entrance, and Flint was struck again by the quiet grace in her movements. "Good morning, Flint. You're prompt." "Said I would be," he replied, removing his hat. "So you did." She gestured toward the examination room. "Let's have a look at that shoulder." As she unwrapped the bandage, her fingers brushed against his skin, leaving a warmth that had nothing to do with infection. Flint sat still, focusing on a spot on the wall rather than the woman whose face was inches from his own. "It looks clean," Sophia pronounced after examining the wound. "No signs of infection. You heal quickly." "Had plenty of practice at that, too," Flint said dryly. Sophia redressed the wound with fresh bandages. "How did you come by this particular injury, if you don't mind my asking?" Flint hesitated. Normally, he would deflect such a question, but something about Sophia's straightforward manner made him reconsider. "Bounty hunter. Recognized me in a saloon down in Durango." Her hands paused briefly before continuing their work. "I see. And the bounty hunter won't be hunting anyone else." Sophia finished tying the bandage and stepped back, meeting his eyes directly. "I don't approve of violence, Flint. But I understand self-defense." "It's a violent country," Flint replied. "Men like me don't get the luxury of clean hands." "And what kind of man are you exactly?" she challenged. The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Before Flint could formulate a response, the door opened, and Dr. Wilcox entered, bringing with him the smell of pipe tobacco and the morning chill. "Ah, Mr. Calloway, prompt with your follow-up. That's rare in these parts." The doctor hung his coat on a peg by the door. "How's our patient, Sophie?" "Healing well," she replied, stepping away from Flint. "No signs of infection." "Excellent. Let's have a look." The doctor examined Flint's wound with practiced efficiency. "Nice stitchwork, Sophie, neat as any I've seen." "You'll have minimal scarring, Mr. Calloway, though I suspect one more scar makes little difference to a man in your line of work." "Doctor," Sophia's tone carried a gentle rebuke. Wilcox chuckled. "Forgive an old man's bluntness. In my profession, I've learned that dancing around truths wastes valuable time." He patted Flint's good shoulder. "You'll do, son. Come back tomorrow and we'll see about those stitches. Might be able to remove them sooner than expected if you continue healing at this rate." After paying for the visit, Flint found himself lingering. "You mentioned your brother's printing press," he said to Sophia as she recorded the payment in her ledger. "The shopkeeper said it's sitting unused." Surprise flickered across her face. "Yes, Thomas was planning to start Moab's first newspaper after he died." She shrugged. "I kept his equipment, hoping someone with the right skills might come along. I worked for a printer in St. Louis, years ago before Wyoming." The admission surprised even Flint himself. He rarely volunteered information about his past. "You know how to operate a printing press?" Sophia's eyes widened with interest. "I do. Typesetting, too." Flint wasn't sure why he was telling her this. It had been over a decade since he'd set type or operated a press. Would you mind looking at Thomas's equipment, just to tell me if it's all there and in working order? I've been meaning to inventory it, but I wouldn't know what I was looking at." Flint should have refused. He should have thanked her for tending his wound and walked away. Instead, he heard himself say, "I can take a look now if you have time." The shed behind the doctor's office was well built but dusty from disuse. Sophia unlocked the padlock and swung the door open, revealing a Washington hand press and several cases of type, carefully packed and covered with canvas. "Thomas had it all shipped from Chicago," Sophia explained as Flint circled the press, examining it with a practiced eye. "It cost him nearly everything he had." Flint ran his hand over the iron frame of the press. "It's a good machine, newer model." He lifted one of the canvas covers from a type case. "And this is quality type. Your brother had good taste. He was determined to do things properly, Sophia said, a note of pride in her voice. Thomas believed Moab needed a newspaper to become a proper town. He said communities are built on shared stories as much as shared land. Flint nodded, continuing his inspection. Everything seems to be here. It would take some cleaning and setting up, but it's all in good condition. Sophia watched him as he examined the equipment, her eyes bright with interest. You seem to know your way around a print shop. My father was a printer in Ohio, Flint explained, surprising himself again with the personal disclosure. I grew up in his shop, learned the trade from him. How did you go from setting type to, she hesitated, to whatever it is you think I am now? Flint finished for her, a hint of challenge in his voice. Sophia met his gaze steadily. I don't presume to know what you are, Flint Calloway. I'm simply curious about the path that brought you here. The honesty in her eyes was disarming. Flint found himself wanting to tell her things he hadn't spoken of in years. It's a long story and not a particularly happy one. Most true stories aren't, she replied. At least not all the way through. Before Flint could respond, a young boy burst into the shed, breathless and wide-eyed. Miss Fairchild, Doc Wilcox says come quick. There's been an accident at the mill. Sophia immediately transformed from curious woman to efficient medical professional. I'll be right there, Jimmy. She turned to Flint. I have to go. Of course. As she hurried toward the door, she paused and looked back. Thank you for looking at the press. Perhaps we can continue our conversation another time. Flint nodded, and she was gone, hurrying after the boy toward whatever emergency awaited. Left alone in the shed, surrounded by the tools of a trade he'd abandoned long ago, Flint felt strangely unsettled. Sophia Fairchild was drawing him out, making him remember parts of himself he'd buried beneath years of hard living and harder choices. He should leave Moab now, wound or no wound. 3 days was too long to stay in one place, especially when that place contained someone who made him think about possibilities beyond survival. And yet, as he secured the shed and walked back toward the main street, Flint knew he wouldn't leave not yet. Something beyond the bullet wound was keeping him in Moab, and that something had sage-green eyes and asked questions no one else had dared to ask in years. The emergency at the mill kept Sophia occupied for the remainder of the day. A worker had been caught in one of the saws, losing 2 fingers and sustaining a deep gash across his forearm. Flint learned this from conversations he overheard in the saloon where he spent the afternoon, nursing a single whiskey while playing poker with locals and travelers. Gambling was as good a way as any to gather information about a town, and Flint had learned long ago that information was often more valuable than money. By evening, he had a clearer picture of Moab and its residents, including the fact that Sophia Fairchild was highly respected despite being a newcomer, and a woman in a profession dominated by men. Doc Wilcox was talking about retiring before she came along, explained Harlan Jeffries, a rancher whose property lay just outside town. His hands aren't steady enough for surgery anymore. Miss Fairchild arrived like an answer to the town's prayers. She's not just a nurse, neither, added another player, a storekeeper named Wilson. She studied medicine back east, though they wouldn't give her a proper doctor's title on account of her being a woman. Doc says she knows more than half the licensed physicians he's met. Pretty little thing, too, commented a drummer passing through town. Shame she ain't married. Woman like that shouldn't be alone. Flint felt an unexpected surge of irritation at the man's proprietary tone. Seems to be managing just fine on her own, he said coolly, laying down his cards. Full house. The drummer scowled as Flint collected the pot. Lucky hand. Luck's got nothing to do with it, Flint replied, stacking his winnings. just paying attention to what's important. As evening settled over Moab, Flint found himself once again at the restaurant in the Colorado house. This time, he chose a table with a view of the door, telling himself it was merely habit rather than hope that a certain doctor's assistant might appear. She didn't, and Flint ate his meal in solitude, ignoring the curious glances from other diners. His reputation had begun to circulate, he could tell from the hushed conversations that halted when he looked up, and the way mothers pulled their children closer when he passed on the boardwalk. It was familiar, this gradual recognition, and usually signaled that it was time to move on. After dinner, Flint stepped onto the hotel's porch and lit a cigar, watching the town settle into evening routines. Lamps were being lit in windows, and the saloon down the street grew rowdier as the night deepened. A figure hurrying along the boardwalk caught his attention. Sophia, medical bag in hand, presumably returning from the mill. Without conscious decision, Flint found himself stepping off the porch and intercepting her path. "Miss Fairchild." She startled, then relaxed when she recognized him. "Flint. You surprised me." "How's the mill worker?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "He'll live, though he'll be missing 2 fingers. It could have been much worse." Fatigue lined her face, but her eyes remained alert. "It was a long surgery. You look tired." A small smile touched her lips. "Are all your observations so direct?" "I find honesty saves time," Flint replied. "As do I. Yes, I'm exhausted, but satisfaction often accompanies exhaustion in my line of work. We saved his arm, which means he'll still be able to support his family." They had reached the doctor's office, and Sophia hesitated at the door. "Would you care for some tea? I find I'm not quite ready to be alone with my thoughts after such a day." Warning bells sounded in Flint's mind. Accepting would be unwise. It would deepen a connection that already threatened to complicate his simple strategy of survival. And yet, he heard himself say, tea would be welcome. Sophia's quarters behind the doctor's office were modest but comfortable, a small parlor with 2 armchairs, a kitchen, and doors leading to what Flint assumed were a bedroom and bathroom. Books lined one wall, medical texts interspersed with volumes of poetry and history. "Please sit," Sophia invited, setting her medical bag aside. "I'll put the kettle on." Flint removed his hat but remained standing, suddenly uncomfortable in this domestic setting. He moved to the bookshelf instead, examining the titles while Sophia busied herself with the tea. "You're well read," he observed, noting works by Shakespeare, Whitman, and several medical authorities. "Books were my constant companions growing up," she replied from the kitchen. "My father was a professor at the university in Philadelphia. He believed education was equally important for his daughter as for his son. Progressive thinking. Yes, though it made finding my place in society somewhat challenging." She returned with a tray bearing a teapot and 2 cups. "Women who can quote both Shakespeare and Gray's Anatomy tend to unnerve potential suitors." There was a wry humor in her voice that made Flint smile despite himself. "Their loss." Sophia poured the tea, then sank into one of the armchairs with a sigh. "Please sit." "I promise not to unnerve you with excessive knowledge." Flint took the other chair, accepting the offered cup. The tea was hot and fragrant with herbs he couldn't name. "How did you end up in Moab?" he asked. "It's a long way from Philadelphia." Sadness flickered across Sophia's face. "Thomas, my brother, came west first about 2 years ago. He had always been adventurous, wanted to be part of building something new. He wrote me such vivid letters about the territories, about the opportunities here." She sipped her tea. "After our father died, there was nothing keeping me in Philadelphia. Thomas suggested I join him in Denver, where he was working for a newspaper. By the time I arrived, he had already contracted cholera and died 3 days before." "I'm sorry," Flint said, and meant it. Sophia nodded acknowledgement. It was devastating, but Thomas had told me so much about his plans for Moab, about starting the first newspaper here. I decided to come see the town he'd spoken of so enthusiastically. And you stayed? I did, Doctor. Wilcox was advertising for help, and my medical training made me suitable. It felt like perhaps this was where I was meant to be all along. Thomas's last gift to me. Flint studied her over the rim of his teacup. Most women would have returned east. I'm not most women, Sophia replied simply. And Philadelphia held nothing for me anymore, just memories and limitations. Here I can practice medicine openly. Dr. Wilcox values my skills without regard to my gender. A rare man. Yes, she set down her cup. Now it's your turn, Mr. Calloway. Fair exchange. What brought you to Moab, besides a bullet wound? Flint hesitated. His instinct was to deflect, to offer the vague non-answers that had served him well for years. But something in Sophia's direct gaze made evasion seem dishonorable. I was passing through, he said finally. I don't stay anywhere long these days. Because of the bounty hunters, partly. Flint set his empty cup on the small table between them. When a man makes the kind of enemies I've made, staying in one place becomes a luxury he can't afford. What kind of enemies merit such constant vigilance? Sophia asked, leaning forward slightly. Flint's expression hardened. The kind with money and influence. The kind who can hire guns in every territory. Because of what happened in Wyoming. For a moment, Flint considered rising and walking out, ending this conversation before it ventured into territory he'd kept locked away for years. But Sophia's expression held no judgment, only genuine interest. Yes, he acknowledged, because of Wyoming. I was a deputy marshal there in a town called Riverton. Took the job because I believed in the law and justice. His laugh was bitter. Young man's foolishness. What happened? Sophia's voice was gentle. Flint stared into the empty teacup as if it might contain the words he needed. I arrested the son of Harold Blackwell, the territory's wealthiest cattle baron. The boy had beaten a prostitute nearly to death in a drunken rage. There were witnesses, evidence, an open and shut case by any measure. But wealth has its privileges, Sophia supplied when he paused. Always has, always will. Flint's voice hardened. Blackwell offered me money to lose the evidence, let his son go. When I refused, he tried threats. I still refused. The night before the trial was to begin, someone broke into the jail. I was knocked unconscious, and when I came to, the cell was empty and the girl who was to testify was dead. Sophia's hand had risen to her mouth. My God! It gets worse, Flint continued, the words flowing now like poison from a lanced wound. Blackwell's men had planted stolen money in my quarters. By morning, I was the one in a cell, charged with taking a bribe and helping the boy escape. My own partner testified against me, claimed he'd suspected me of corruption for months. But that's justice for sale, Flint interrupted. I was sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. After 2 years, I escaped during a prison transfer. Been running ever since with Blackwell's bounty hunters on my trail. He doesn't want me back in prison, he wants me dead, to ensure I never tell what really happened. Silence fell between them. Flint waited for the judgment, the disbelief, or worse, the pity that usually followed his story on the rare occasions he shared it. Instead, Sophia rose and poured more tea for both of them. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Have you ever considered fighting back? Not with guns, but with the truth. Flint looked at her incredulously. Against a man like Blackwell. He owns judges, newspapers, politicians. My word against his empire. That's not a fight, it's suicide. Perhaps. But the right words published in the right places can be powerful weapons. She gestured toward the window in the direction of the shed where her brother's printing press sat idle. Truth has a way of finding light, even against the most determined efforts to bury it. You're suggesting write my story, publish it? Flint shook his head. Who would believe an escaped convict over one of the territory's most respected citizens? People are more discerning than you give them credit for, Sophia countered. And truth has a ring to it that lies can't quite match, no matter how well crafted. The idea was absurd, and yet Flint couldn't dismiss it entirely. Even if I were inclined to try such a fool's errand, I'd need evidence, witnesses. All I have is my word, and that's worth precious little these days. It's worth something to me, Sophia said quietly. Their eyes met, and Flint felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling that had stood firm for years. This woman, with her steady gaze and quiet conviction, had somehow slipped past his defenses in a way no one had since Wyoming. The realization was terrifying. "It's late," he said abruptly, rising. "You need rest after your day, and I've taken enough of your time." Disappointment flickered in Sophia's eyes, but she didn't protest. "Of course. Thank you for the company." At the door, Flint paused. "Thank you for the tea and for listening. Will I see you tomorrow for your wound check?" There was a note in her voice that suggested she was asking about more than his injury. "Yes," Flint promised. "Tomorrow." Outside, the night air was cool against his face. Flint stood for a moment, looking up at the stars scattered across the black canvas of the sky. For years, he had lived by simple rules: trust no one, form no attachments, keep moving. In one day, Sophia Fairchild had made him question all three. It was dangerous. She was dangerous, though not in any way he could fight against with weapons or wary vigilance. Her danger lay in the hope. She represented hope for something beyond endless running, beyond the solitary existence he'd resigned himself to. Hope was a luxury Flint Calloway couldn't afford. And yet, as he walked back to his hotel room, he found himself considering possibilities he hadn't dared contemplate in years. Morning brought rain to Moab, a rare occurrence in the arid landscape. Flint woke to the sound of water pattering against his window and lay still for a moment, listening. There was something cleansing about the rain, as if it might wash away the lingering darkness of last night's confessions. He dressed carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, which felt markedly better this morning. The stitches pulled slightly as he shrugged into his shirt, but the pain was manageable, a vast improvement from 2 days ago. The hotel dining room was busier than usual, filled with travelers delayed by the weather. Flint found an empty table near the back and ordered breakfast, maintaining his habitual vigilance despite the mundane surroundings. Old habits died hard, especially those that had kept him alive. He was halfway through his meal when Marshal Everett Green entered the dining room, shaking rain from his coat. The lawman's eyes scanned the room, coming to rest on Flint with a flicker of recognition. Flint tensed, hand instinctively moving closer to his holstered revolver. Green approached Flint's table with measured steps. "Mind if I join you? Free country," Flint replied, though his posture remained alert. The marshal took a seat, signaling to the waitress for coffee. "Name's Everett Green. I'm the law in Moab. Flint Calloway." "I know." Green's voice was neutral. "Word travels, especially when it concerns a man with your history." Flint set down his fork. "Is there a problem, Marshal?" "Not yet." Green studied Flint over the rim of his coffee cup as the waitress delivered it. "Just making sure there won't be one. Moab's a peaceful town. I aim to keep it that way. I'm not looking for trouble. Trouble has a way of finding men like you, regardless of what they're looking for." The marshal's tone wasn't threatening, merely factual. "How long do you plan to stay?" "Another day or two. Doctor's orders." Green nodded. Miss Fairchild mentioned you were her patient. She seems to think highly of you, this surprised Flint. We've barely met. She's a good judge of character, better than most. The marshal sipped his coffee. Still, I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't make certain things clear. Whatever brought you to Moab, whatever's on your trail, I don't want it spilling onto my streets. Fair enough. I've heard stories about Wyoming, Green continued. Not all of them paint you as the villain Blackwell claims you are. Flint's eyes narrowed. What's your point, Marshal? My point is that I judge men by what I see, not by what I hear. So far, you've conducted yourself peacefully in my town. Keep it that way and we'll have no quarrel. That's my intention. Green finished his coffee and stood. Good. Enjoy your stay in Moab, Mr. Calloway, short as it may be. With a nod, he departed, leaving Flint to consider this unexpected encounter. The marshal hadn't threatened him, hadn't even asked him to leave town. It was a courtesy Flint rarely experienced from lawmen these days, most of whom were either eager to claim Blackwell's bounty or anxious to avoid the trouble that seemed to follow Flint like a shadow. After breakfast, Flint made his way through the rain to the doctor's office for his scheduled wound check. The bell announced his arrival, but it was Dr. Wilcox who greeted him rather than Sophia. "Mr. Calloway, come in, come in. Nasty weather, isn't it?" The doctor ushered him into the examination room. "Sophie's making house calls this morning. Baby coming over at the Peterson farm. She's becoming quite the midwife, that girl." Disappointment pricked at Flint, though he kept his expression neutral. "I'm just here for the wound check." Of course. Let's have a look." Wilcox's examination was thorough but quick, healing remarkably well. "Those stitches can probably come out tomorrow if you're still in town." "I will be," Flint found himself saying, though he'd planned to leave after today. "Excellent. Sophie will be pleased. She takes pride in her work, doesn't like to leave a job half done." The doctor re-wrapped Flint's shoulder. "That'll be $1 for today's visit." As Flint paid, Wilcox studied him with the same shrewd gaze he'd shown at dinner the previous evening. "You know, Mr. Calloway, Moab's a growing town. We need skilled men of all sorts. I'm just passing through, doctor, so you've said, but sometimes life has other plans for us." Wilcox winked. "Just something to consider." Outside, the rain had slackened to a gentle drizzle. With no particular destination in mind, Flint found himself wandering toward the outskirts of town, past the mill and along the river that gave Moab its lifeblood. The rain had turned the usually dusty path to mud, but Flint hardly noticed, lost in thought. What was he doing here? He should be miles away by now, putting distance between himself and the bounty hunters who were surely still on his trail. Instead, he was lingering in Moab, making connections, sharing secrets he'd kept buried for years, because of Sophia Fairchild. A woman he'd known for barely 2 days, yet who had somehow slipped past defenses built over a lifetime. Lost in these troubling thoughts, Flint almost missed the movement in the trees ahead, a flicker of motion that didn't belong to the wind or rain. His hand moved instinctively to his revolver as he stepped off the path, seeking cover behind a large cottonwood. The sound came next, horses approaching, moving slowly as if their riders were being cautious. Flint remained motionless, using the tree trunk as cover while he watched the bend in the path. 3 riders appeared, leading a 4th horse. Their slickers glistened with rain, and their hats were pulled low against the weather. Even so, Flint recognized the man in front, Silas Reed, a bounty hunter he'd encountered twice before. The other 2 were unfamiliar, but their bearing marked them as hired guns. Flint's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been careless, staying too long in one place. Now Blackwell's men had found him, and Moab would pay the price if he didn't act quickly. He waited until the riders passed his position, then slipped back toward town, keeping to the trees that lined the river. He needed to gather his belongings and leave immediately before innocent people got caught in the crossfire that always seemed to find him. Back at the Colorado house, Flint packed his meager possessions with practiced efficiency. He had paid for his room through tomorrow, but that couldn't be helped. Better to lose a night's lodging than risk bringing violence to people who had shown him nothing but decency. As he strapped on his gun belt, a knock came at his door. Wary, Flint drew his revolver before calling, "Who is it?" "Sophia Fairchild." Relief mingled with fresh anxiety as Flint holstered his weapon and opened the door. Sophia stood in the hallway, her cloak damp from the rain, cheeks flushed from the cold or exertion. "You're leaving," she said immediately, taking in his packed saddlebags. "I have to." Flint stepped aside to let her enter, then closed the door. "Blackwell's men are in Moab. I saw them on the river path." Concern shadowed her features. "Are you certain?" I recognized Silas Reed. "He's one of Blackwell's regular hunters." Flint secured the last of his belongings. "I need to be gone before they realize I'm here." "And then what? You keep running until they eventually catch you, or until you're too old or too tired to run anymore." There was frustration in Sophia's voice. "That's not a life, Flint. It's just prolonged survival." "It's all I have," he replied sharply. "It doesn't have to be." She stepped closer, her eyes intense. "Fight back. Not with guns, with the truth. Use Thomas's press. Write what happened in Wyoming, publish it, send copies to every newspaper in the territory. Make your story too public for Blackwell to bury. And put everyone in Moab at risk." "Put you at risk?" Flint shook his head. "Blackwell doesn't just kill his enemies, Sophia. He destroys them completely, their reputations, their families, anyone who stands with them." "Some things are worth the risk," she insisted. "Justice, truth, the chance to reclaim your life." Flint grabbed his saddlebags. "I don't have time for this. They could be checking the hotel any minute." Sophia blocked his path to the door, her chin lifted in determination. "If you leave now, you'll be running forever. Is that really what you want? To die alone in some nameless canyon with a bounty hunter's bullet in your back?" Her words struck deeper than she could know. How many times had Flint imagined exactly that end for himself? How many years had he accepted it as inevitable? "What I want stopped mattering a long time ago," he said quietly. "It matters to me." Sophia's voice softened. "I know we've just met, but I see something in you worth fighting for, something beyond the hard exterior you show the world." Flint stood frozen, caught between the urgency of escape and the pull of her words. For a wild moment, he considered what she was suggesting, using the printing press, telling his story, making a stand instead of running again. "They'll kill you," he said finally. "Anyone who helps me becomes a target. I'm not afraid. You should be." Flint moved past her to the window, peering through the curtains at the street below. His heart sank as he spotted Reed and his companions dismounting in front of the hotel. "They're here." Sophia joined him at the window. "Is there another way out? Back stairs lead to the alley." Flint gathered his belongings. "I need to get to the livery, get Diablo." "You can't. They'll be watching it." Sophia thought quickly. "Come with me to the doctor's office. We can hide you in the cellar until dark." Flint hesitated. Involving Sophia further was dangerous, but she was right. The bounty hunters would expect him to head for his horse. The direct approach would lead him straight into their trap. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. "But only until nightfall. Then I'm leaving, with or without Diablo." They slipped down the back stairs and into the rain-soaked alley behind the hotel. Sophia led the way, moving with surprising stealth for a doctor's assistant. They kept to the narrow spaces between buildings, avoiding the main street where Reed and his men would likely be asking questions about Flint's whereabouts. The doctor's office was quiet when they arrived through the back entrance. "Doctor." Wilcox is visiting his sister in Grand Junction, Sophia explained as she locked the door behind them. He won't be back until tomorrow. She led Flint to a trapdoor in the storage room floor, revealing a small cellar used for keeping medical supplies cool. It's not comfortable, but it's safe. No one knows about this except the doctor and myself. Flint descended the ladder into the musty space. It was cramped but dry, with shelves of bottled medicines lining one wall. What will you do if they come asking questions? Tell them the truth that my patient with the gunshot wound checked out of the hotel. Sophia's expression was resolute. The rest is none of their business. Be careful, Flint warned. Men like Reed don't respect boundaries. I'll be fine, stay quiet, and I'll bring you food later. She began to close the trapdoor, then paused. Think about what I said, Flint, about fighting back. You don't have to decide now, but promise me you'll consider it. Before he could respond, she closed the trapdoor, leaving him in darkness broken only by thin slivers of light through the floorboards above. Hours passed slowly in the confined space. Flint sat with his back against the cool earth wall, listening to occasional footsteps above, as Sophia went about her normal duties. Twice, the bell over the front door jangled, signaling visitors, but the conversations were too muffled for him to make out the words. As daylight faded, casting the cellar into deeper darkness, Flint pondered Sophia's suggestion. Using the printing press to tell his story was a bold move, possibly suicidal, but undeniably bold. For years, he'd focused solely on staying alive, on keeping one step ahead of Blackwell's hunters. The thought of turning and fighting back, even with words rather than bullets, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. And then there was Sophia herself. In just 3 days, she had become more than a stranger who had tended his wound. She had become something Flint hadn't allowed himself in years. A connection to another human being, a reason to consider a future beyond mere survival. The trapdoor opened, interrupting his thoughts. Sophia's face appeared in the opening, illuminated by the lamp she carried. "They've been asking all over town about you," she reported, descending the ladder. "Marshal Green told them you left this morning, headed south." "Green lied for me." Flint was surprised. "He said he doesn't appreciate bounty hunters operating in his jurisdiction without his permission." Sophia set down the lamp and handed Flint a bundle containing bread, cheese, and dried meat. "He also mentioned that he's never been fond of Harold Blackwell." Flint unwrapped the food, suddenly aware of his hunger. "Green's making enemies he can't afford. Or perhaps he's choosing his allies more carefully than you give him credit for." Sophia settled on an empty crate across from him. "I spoke with him about your situation. He's willing to give you sanctuary in Moab while you write your account of what happened in Wyoming." Flint paused mid-bite. "You told him your plan, without consulting me." "I presented him with a possibility," Sophia corrected. "The decision remains yours, but you should know you have supporters, Flint, people who believe in justice over wealth and power." "Justice is a luxury in the territories," Flint said bitterly. "Only if good people refuse to demand it." Sophia leaned forward, her expression earnest in the lamplight. "You were a lawman once. You believed in justice enough to stand against Blackwell when it would have been easier to take his bribe. That man is still inside you, Flint." "I've seen glimpses of him." Her faith in him was both touching and troubling. Flint had spent so long seeing himself through the lens of his failures that her vision of him as a man of principle worth fighting for was almost impossible to reconcile with his own self-image. "Even if I agreed to this mad plan," he said slowly, "where would I start? It's been years. Witnesses are dead or scattered. Evidence is long gone. Start with the truth as you know it. Names, dates, details that can be verified." Marshal Green has contacts in the Wyoming Territory who might help gather supporting evidence. Sophia's eyes shone with conviction. The truth has power, Flint. It wants to be known. Flint finished his meal in silence, weighing his options. Running had kept him alive, but at what cost? He was tired, bone deep tired of looking over his shoulder, of having no home, no connections, no future beyond the next town, the next hideout, the next narrow escape. "If I do this," he said finally, "and it fails, Blackwell won't stop at killing me. Anyone who helped me will suffer." "I understand the risk," Sophia replied steadily. "Do you? Have you ever faced men like Blackwell's hunters? Have you seen what they're capable of?" Flint's voice was harsh with memories he couldn't escape. "No," she admitted, "but I've seen what fear can do to a person over time. How it can hollow them out until there's nothing left but survival instincts. Is that really living, Flint?" Her question hung in the air between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth of it. Flint had been existing, not living, for years now. "One night," he said at last. "Give me one night to think about it." Relief softened Sophia's features. "That's all I ask." She rose and collected the empty food wrappings. "You can sleep here tonight. It's safer than trying to leave town with Reed and his men watching the roads." "Thank you," Flint said, the words inadequate for what she was risking on his behalf. Sophia paused at the ladder, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. "Whatever you decide, Flint Calloway, know that you've reminded me of something important." "What's that?" "That some battles are worth fighting, even when victory seems impossible." With that, she climbed the ladder and closed the trapdoor, leaving Flint alone with his thoughts and the weight of a decision that could change everything. Dawn filtered through the cracks in the cellar floor, waking Flint from a fitful sleep. His neck was stiff from leaning against the earthen wall, and his shoulder ached dully beneath the bandages. Yet despite the discomfort, his mind was clearer than it had been in years. When Sophia opened the trapdoor an hour later, bringing fresh coffee and biscuits, she found him sitting calmly, his decision made. "I'll do it," he said simply as she descended the ladder. Joy lit her features, transforming her from merely beautiful to radiant. "You will, on one condition." Flint accepted the coffee she offered. "You stay clear of it. I write my story, Marshal Green helps where he can, but you remain uninvolved officially, at least. Your name stays out of it completely." Sophia frowned. "That's unnecessary." "I'm not afraid of it's not negotiable," Flint interrupted. "I've seen what Blackwell does to people who cross him. I won't have that on my conscience." She studied him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but I'm still helping with the printing press." "It was Thomas's, and I know how to operate it, at least the basics. He taught me when he worked for the paper in Denver." Flint hadn't expected that. "You know printing?" "Enough to be useful. I'm a quick study." There was a hint of challenge in her voice. "Besides, you can't exactly advertise for an assistant when you're supposed to be hiding from bounty hunters." She had a point. Setting up the press and printing even a modest run of his story would be difficult alone. "Fine," he conceded, "but only the technical aspects." "If things go wrong, they won't," Sophia interjected with a confidence Flint wished he shared. "Reed and his men left town this morning. Marshal Green says they were convinced by his story that you'd headed south. We have time." Time. It was a concept Flint had almost forgotten, focused as he'd been on immediate survival. Time to plan, to write, to consider a future beyond the next escape. "We should move the press," he suggested. "Somewhere less obvious than the shed behind the doctor's office." Sophia nodded. Marshal Green suggested the old tannery at the edge of town. "It's been empty since the new one was built, but the building is sound. And it's isolated enough that comings and goings won't attract much attention." The pieces were falling into place with a speed that made Flint uneasy. "You've been planning this." "Hoping," Sophia corrected. "There's a difference." After breakfast, they waited until mid-morning when the streets were busy with normal activity before making their way to the abandoned tannery. Marshal Green met them there, bringing the wagon that would transport the printing press from its current location. "Miss Fairchild told me about your situation," Green said, extending his hand to Flint. "I've never had much love for Harold Blackwell or his methods. If your story is true, it deserves to be told." "And if it brings trouble to your town?" Flint asked, shaking the offered hand. "Trouble comes regardless," Green replied with a shrug. "At least this kind serves a purpose beyond lining some rich man's pockets." With the marshal's help, they loaded the disassembled press and type cases onto the wagon and transported them to the tannery. The building still carried the acrid smell of its former purpose, but it was structurally sound and offered multiple exits in case a quick departure became necessary. Over the next 3 days, Flint and Sophia worked to set up the press. The labor was therapeutic for Flint, reminding him of happier times in his father's print shop. Sophia proved adept at the technical aspects, her medical precision transferring well to the detailed work of arranging type. During breaks, they talked. Sophia shared stories of her life in Philadelphia, her medical training, her relationship with her brother. Flint, in turn, found himself opening up about his childhood in Ohio, his brief career as a territorial lawman before Wyoming, even his dreams before Blackwell had destroyed them. "I wanted to start a newspaper of my own someday," he admitted on the 3rd evening as they finished setting the last case of type. "Somewhere growing but not too big, a place where knowing the truth mattered." "Like Moab," Sophia suggested quietly. Flint glanced at her, caught off guard by the implication. "I can't stay here, Sophia. Even if this works, especially if it works, Blackwell won't stop coming after me. Unless he's discredited so thoroughly that his power is broken." She wiped ink from her hands with a rag. "It's happened before. Even the mightiest can fall when their crimes are exposed. You have more faith in justice than I do." "Perhaps I have faith in you," she countered. Their eyes met across the press, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had been growing steadily since that first meeting in the doctor's office. Flint looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity of what he felt. "We should call it a night," he suggested. "I'll start writing tomorrow." Writing proved harder than Flint had anticipated. For years, he had buried the details of Wyoming deep in his memory, speaking of them only in the barest outlines when absolutely necessary. Now, he needed to excavate every painful moment, every name, every betrayal. He sat at a small desk in the corner of the tannery, surrounded by blank sheets of paper, struggling to find the words that would convey not just facts but truth. "Start at the beginning," Sophia suggested when she found him still staring at an empty page at midday. "The day you became deputy marshal. What made you take the job?" Her question unlocked something in him. Flint began to write, hesitantly at first, then with increasing fluency as the memories flowed. He wrote through the afternoon and into the evening, pausing only when Sophia insisted he eat something. By nightfall, he had completed the first part of his account: his appointment as deputy marshal, his early days in Riverton, the political landscape of the Wyoming Territory, and Harold Blackwell's growing influence. "This is powerful, Flint," Sophia said after reading what he had written. "Your voice comes through clearly, honest, direct." "It's just the background," he replied. "The hard part comes tomorrow." The hard part was reliving the arrest of James Blackwell, the beatings he had inflicted on the young prostitute, the evidence Flint had gathered, and the gradual realization that forces beyond his control were aligning against him. Writing about the night of the jailbreak and the murder of the witness made Flint's hands shake with suppressed rage, but he forced himself to continue, to document every detail with the precision he would have used for an official report. The final section, his frame-up, trial, imprisonment, and escape, was the most difficult. Each word scraped against wounds that had never properly healed. By the time he wrote the last sentence, describing his years on the run from Blackwell's bounty hunters, Flint felt hollowed out, as if the story had taken something vital from him. But there was also relief, a weight lifted after being carried too long. "It's done," he told Sophia, handing her the stack of handwritten pages. All of it. She read the complete manuscript that evening, her expression growing increasingly somber. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes. "This needs to be told, Flint. Not just for your sake, but for that poor girl who died, for justice itself." They began setting type the next morning, a painstaking process that would take several days. Flint worked the press while Sophia arranged the type, their movements becoming synchronized as they settled into a rhythm. Marshal Green visited daily, bringing food and news from town. "No sign of Raid or his companions," the marshal reported on the fourth day of printing. "But I've received word from my contact in Cheyenne. He's gathering affidavits from people who remember your case. Seems there are still those willing to speak up now that some years have passed. Blackwell's influence may be waning," Sophia suggested hopefully. "No one stays in power forever." "Maybe," Flint acknowledged, though he remained skeptical, "but he's still dangerous." As they neared completion of the printing, Flint found himself thinking beyond the immediate task. If the pamphlets were distributed as planned, sent to newspapers and officials throughout the territory, what then? Would it lead to his name being cleared? Would Blackwell finally face justice for his crimes? Or would it simply make Flint a more visible target? And there was Sophia to consider. In the weeks they had worked together, she had become more than an ally. She had become essential to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The thought of leaving her when the printing was finished created an ache more profound than any physical wound he had endured. The night before the final printing, Flint found Sophia standing outside the tannery, gazing at the stars. He joined her silently, respecting the contemplative mood that seemed to envelop her. "What happens after tomorrow?" she asked finally, voicing the question that had been haunting them both. "The pamphlets go out," Flint replied. "Marshal Green has arranged for riders to carry them to newspapers in Grand Junction, Denver, even as far as Cheyenne. After that." He hesitated. "After that, I don't know. You could stay," Sophia suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Moab." Flint looked at her, illuminated by moonlight, and felt something inside him shift, like the final tumbler falling in a lock, opening a door he had believed forever closed. "To do what?" "Whatever you want. Whatever you dreamed of before Wyoming." She turned to face him fully. "Thomas's press doesn't have to be used just for your story. Moab needs a newspaper. You said yourself it was your dream once." "Dreams change," Flint said, though without conviction. "And Blackwell may never regain the power he once held once your story spreads." Sophia stepped closer. "You've been running for so long, Flint. Maybe it's time to stand your ground." "It's not just about me anymore," he admitted, the words difficult after years of solitary existence. "If I stay, anyone close to me becomes a target." "Some risks are worth taking," Sophia replied, echoing words she had spoken days ago. "Some connections are worth fighting for." Her hand found his in the darkness, warm and certain. Flint looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face, at the woman who had somehow carved a place for herself in a heart he had thought turned to stone. "I don't want to lose you," he confessed, the truth finally spoken aloud. "Then don't," she answered simply, and stood on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they both feared this fragile thing between them might shatter. Then Flint's arms came around her, pulling her against him as the kiss deepened, becoming a promise neither had dared articulate before now. When they finally separated, breathless, Sophia rested her forehead against his chest. "Stay, Flint. Not forever if you can't promise that yet. Just stay until we see what happens with your story, until we know if it's safe." It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a beginning. And after years of endings, of goodbyes and narrow escapes, a beginning was something Flint had almost forgotten how to hope for. "All right," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Until we know." They completed the printing the next day 100 copies of The Truth About Harold Blackwell, a former deputy marshal's account of corruption and murder in Wyoming Territory. The title was stark, the contents starker, detailing every aspect of Blackwell's crimes and the system that had protected him. Marshal Green arrived with 3 trusted writers who would distribute the pamphlets throughout the territory. "These men understand the importance of discretion," he assured Flint. "They'll deliver the copies directly to newspaper editors and territorial officials. After that, it's in their hands." "And mine," Flint added grimly. "Whatever comes of this, the responsibility is mine." "Ours," Sophia corrected, standing beside him. "You're not alone in this anymore." As the riders departed with their controversial cargo, Flint felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. For better or worse, he had made his stand. After years of running, he had turned to face his pursuers, armed not with guns but with the truth he had carried for so long. Now all that remained was to wait and see if truth was indeed the powerful weapon Sophia believed it to be. The response came faster than any of them had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, newspapers across the territory began publishing excerpts from Flint's account, often accompanied by editorial demands for an official investigation. Marshal Green's contacts in Cheyenne reported that the territorial governor had ordered a review of the original case. But with the growing public interest came increased danger. Reports reached Moab of Blackwell's fury, of increased bounties offered for Flint's capture dead or alive, and rumors of gunmen hired to silence anyone connected to the pamphlet's publication. "You need to be careful," Flint warned Sophia as they walked from the doctor's office to her quarters one evening. "Blackwell's men could be anywhere." "I'm being careful," she assured him. "Dr. Wilcox has someone stay with me at night, and I never walk alone during the day." Despite these precautions, fear gnawed at Flint constantly. He had taken to sleeping in the back room of the tannery, unwilling to stay at the hotel where his presence might endanger other guests. Each day brought more news of the growing scandal surrounding Blackwell, but also increased the likelihood of violent retaliation. "The governor has appointed a special prosecutor," Marshal Green reported one afternoon, bringing newspapers from Denver and Cheyenne. "And 2 former associates of Blackwell have come forward, confirming parts of your account." "It's working," Sophia said excitedly, scanning the newspaper headlines. "Cattle baron faces inquiry. Witnesses emerge in Blackwell scandal. Flint, people are listening." Flint nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "Blackwell won't go down without a fight. He has too much to lose." "But he's not invulnerable," Green pointed out. "His political allies are distancing themselves. No one wants to be associated with him now that the details are public." That evening, alone in the tannery, Flint began writing again, not about Blackwell this time, but about Moab. About the town's needs, its growth, its potential. The beginnings of a newspaper editorial that might never see print, but which represented a future he was allowing himself to imagine for the first time in years. He was so absorbed in his writing that he didn't hear the door open. The first indication of another presence was the cold press of a gun barrel against the back of his head. "Hello, Calloway," came a familiar voice. "You've led me on quite a chase." "Silas Reed." Flint kept his hands visible on the desk. "Reed, I thought you'd left town and missed the chance to collect Blackwell's bounty." "Not likely." Reed circled to face Flint, keeping the gun trained on him. "Though I must say you've caused the old man considerable trouble with that rag you published." "It's all true," Flint said evenly. "Every word." "Truth's a luxury for men who aren't being paid to care about it." Reed gestured with the gun. "Get up, slowly. Blackwell wants to deal with you personally." Flint rose, mind racing through his limited options. His own revolver was out of reach, hanging with his gun belt on a hook near the door. Reed was a professional, unlikely to make amateur mistakes like getting too close or becoming distracted. "You won't make it out of town," Flint warned. "Marshal Green has men watching all the roads." Reed smirked. "Already taken care of. My associates are creating a distraction that will keep the marshal and his deputies quite busy on the other side of town. Now move." As they reached the door, it suddenly swung open. Sophia stood in the doorway, a package in her hands, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. "Well, well," Reed drawled. "If it isn't the doctor's pretty assistant. I've heard about you, Miss Fairchild. Blackwell will be interested to know you're involved in this." "Run, Sophia." Flint shouted, but Reed was already moving, grabbing her arm and pulling her inside, kicking the door shut behind her. "No one's running anywhere," Reed said coldly, now holding the gun on Sophia. "In fact, I think Miss Fairchild will be joining us on our journey to Wyoming. Blackwell pays extra for those who help his enemies." Rage surged through Flint, along with a fear more profound than any he had felt for his own safety. "This is between Blackwell and me. Let her go." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Reed replied. "Now, both of you are going to." Whatever Reed had been about to say was lost, as Sophia suddenly threw the package she was holding directly at his face. The distraction was brief but sufficient. Flint lunged forward, grappling for the gun. Reed recovered quickly, and the two men crashed into the printing press, sending type scattering across the floor. "Sophia, run!" Flint yelled again as he struggled with the bounty hunter, but she was already moving not toward the door but toward Flint's gun belt hanging nearby. Reed was strong and fought with the desperation of a man who knew failure meant his own death at Blackwell's hands. The gun went off, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. Flint managed to slam Reed's wrist against the edge of the press, forcing him to drop the weapon. But the bounty hunter wasn't finished. He drew a knife from his boot and slashed at Flint, opening a cut along his forearm. Flint stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance on the scattered type. "Flint!" Sophia's voice rang out. She tossed his revolver toward him. Flint caught it one-handed, bringing it up just as Reed charged with the knife. The gunshot echoed in the confined space of the tannery, followed by a second as Flint fired again to be certain. Reed crumpled to the floor, his knife clattering beside him, eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Flint lowered his revolver, breathing hard. "Are you all right?" he asked Sophia, who stood pale but composed near the door. "Yes," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. But he said there were others, a distraction. As if in answer to her unfinished thought, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the town center. Flint moved quickly, retrieving his gun belt and strapping it on. "Stay here," he instructed. "Barricade the door after I leave." "I'm coming with you," Sophia insisted. "No. Reed may have been telling the truth about Blackwell wanting you too. You're safer here." And if they come back here looking for you, Flint hesitated, torn between the need to help the town and the desire to protect Sophia. Before he could decide, the door burst open again, this time revealing Marshal Green, his face grim. "Calloway, we've got trouble. 4 gunmen shooting up the town looking for you." His gaze fell on Reed's body. "I see you've already met one of them." "Reed said it was a distraction," Flint explained quickly. "To keep you busy while he took me to Blackwell." Green nodded. "Makes sense. My deputies are pinned down near the hotel. These aren't ordinary hired guns, they are professionals, and they don't care who gets hurt." "I'll help," Flint offered immediately. "But Sophia needs protection." "Already thought of that. Dr. Wilcox is waiting outside with a wagon. He'll take Miss Fairchild to the Peterson farm until this is over." Sophia began to protest, but Flint took her hands in his. "Please, Sophia. I can't focus on stopping them if I'm worried about you. Go with Dr. Wilcox." She searched his face, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Flint. Come back to me." "I will," he promised, then kissed her quickly before turning to the marshal. "Let's end this." The streets of Moab had transformed into a battlefield. Storefronts were riddled with bullets, and citizens cowered in whatever shelter they could find. Flint and Marshal Green moved cautiously from building to building, locating the deputies and coordinating a strategy to contain the gunmen. "They're holed up in the saloon," one deputy reported. "Been shooting at anyone who moves on the street." "They want me," Flint said grimly. "I should show myself, draw their fire, and get yourself killed." Green shook his head. "That doesn't help anyone." "I have a better idea," Flint replied, explaining his plan quickly. Minutes later, Flint's had appeared at the end of the street, visible above a water trough. Immediately, gunfire erupted from the saloon windows, splintering wood and sending water spraying into the air. While the gunmen focused on what they thought was Flint, Green and his deputies approached the saloon from the rear and sides. The ensuing gunfight was brief but intense. When it ended, 3 of Blackwell's men lay dead, and the 4th was wounded and in custody. "Is that all of them?" Flint asked Green as they surveyed the damage to the town. "According to our prisoner, yes. Reed was the leader. The others were just following orders." Green clapped Flint on the shoulder. "It's over, Calloway. For now, at least." But it wasn't over. As news of the gunfight in Moab spread, so too did Flint's story about Blackwell's crimes. The territorial governor expanded the investigation, appointing a judge known for his incorruptibility to oversee the proceedings. Witnesses emerged from years of silence, emboldened by the changing tide. The partner who had testified against Flint recanted his story, admitting he had been bribed and threatened by Blackwell. Evidence that had mysteriously disappeared during the original trial was suddenly discovered in the files of a clerk who had been on Blackwell's payroll. 3 months after the publication of Flint's pamphlet, Harold Blackwell was indicted on charges of obstruction of justice, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. His financial empire began to crumble as investors and political allies abandoned him. The bounty on Flint's head was officially rescinded by territorial authorities. In Moab, life gradually returned to normal. The damage from the gunfight was repaired, and the town's growth continued unabated. Flint, no longer forced to hide, moved from the tannery to proper lodgings in town. And the printing press found a new purpose. The first edition of the Moab Messenger appeared exactly 4 months after the shootout, with Flint Calloway listed as editor and publisher. The front page carried news of Blackwell's indictment, and a personal editorial thanking the people of Moab for their courage and support. "It's everything Thomas dreamed of," Sophia said proudly as they stood together in the newspaper office that had once been the tannery, now cleaned and renovated for its new purpose. A voice for truth in a place that needs it. It's everything I dreamed of too, Flint replied, looking not at the press but at Sophia. A fresh start, a purpose, a home. "And is Moab home now?" she asked, hope evident in her voice. In answer, Flint reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I was hoping it could be for both of us." Sophia's eyes widened as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small emerald that matched her eyes. "Flint, I don't have much to offer beyond a newspaper that may never make a profit and a reputation that's only beginning to be repaired," he said earnestly. "But I love you, Sophia Fairchild. You saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. You gave me back my voice, my purpose, my future." Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes as she looked from the ring to Flint's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it, the newspaper, the reputation, the future. Most of all, yes to you." As Flint slipped the ring onto her finger, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in the space of a few months. From a hunted man with no home and no hope to a newspaper editor with prospects and plans, and most importantly, with Sophia by his side. The wedding took place in the spring of 1879, with Marshall Green serving as Flint's best man and Dr. Wilcox giving the bride away. The entire town of Moab seemed to attend, each citizen feeling somehow invested in the union that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. That same month, word reached them that Harold Blackwell had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. The justice Flint had sought for so long had finally been served. More importantly, the threat that had hung over him for years was lifted at last. "What do you think?" Sophia asked as they stood on the porch of their new home, a modest house near the outskirts of Moab with a view of the red rock formations that had first greeted Flint when he rode into town. "About what?" Flint replied, his arm around her waist. "About everything. The house, the newspaper, the future." Flint looked out at the landscape that had once represented nothing more than another temporary refuge in an endless flight. Now it was home, his and Sophia's, with all the promise that word contained. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've finally stopped running." Sophia leaned her head against his shoulder and started living instead. "Yes," Flint agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Thanks to you. The years that followed brought changes to Moab and to the Calloways. The town grew steadily, attracting settlers and businesses. The Moab Messenger flourished under Flint's guidance, becoming known throughout the territory for its honest reporting and fearless editorials. Sophia continued her medical work alongside Dr. Wilcox, eventually taking over the practice when the elderly physician retired. Her reputation as a skilled healer spread beyond Moab's boundaries, bringing patients from surrounding communities. Their first child, a son they named Thomas in honor of Sophia's brother, was born in the winter of 1880. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. The Calloway home, once quiet, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the everyday rhythms of family life. On the 5th anniversary of Flint's arrival in Moab, he and Sophia hosted a gathering for their closest friends, Marshall Green, now married himself, Dr. Wilcox, enjoying his retirement, and others who had stood by them during those tumultuous early days. As twilight descended and their guests departed, Flint and Sophia lingered on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the mountains that had once seemed as hard and unyielding as Flint's own heart. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Sophia asked, her hand warm in his. "If you hadn't been shot, if you hadn't come to Moab?" "Sometimes," Flint admitted. "But then I remember something my father used to say, that life has a way of leading us where we need to go, even when the path seems random or cruel." Sophia smiled, leaning against him. Your father was a wise man. He would have liked you, Flint said softly. He always said I needed someone who could match my stubbornness. I prefer to call it determination, Sophia replied with a laugh. Then, more seriously, are you happy, Flint? Truly? Flint looked at his wife, at the home they had built together, at the life that had seemed impossible just 5 years ago when he was a wounded, hunted man with nothing but survival on his mind. More than I ever thought possible, he answered honestly. You carved your name on my heart, Sophia Calloway. Everything good in my life began with you. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture that had become familiar but never commonplace. And everything good in mine began when a stubborn, wounded cowboy walked into the doctor's office. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring the usual demands of the newspaper, the medical practice, the ongoing project of building a life together. But for now, in the quiet of the evening, Flint and Sophia Calloway stood together on their porch, watching the stars above Moab, no longer strangers in a temporary haven, but home at last.